July 2, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The pilot of a German Focke-Wulf 190 never saw the P-40 Warhawk diving from above until streams of .50 caliber rounds shredded his fuselage, sending his aircraft spiraling into the Sicilian countryside. At the controls of the American fighter was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, just 22 years old, from Brazil, Indiana. In that instant, Hall accomplished what German Luftwaffe commanders believed was impossible. A black American pilot had just shot down one of their elite fighter aircraft. Later that day, a swastika was painted on the side of Hall's P-40L Warhawk, marking the kill. It would be the first of 112 enemy aircraft destroyed by a group of men whom German pilots would grudgingly come to nickname Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. For the Nazis, who classified black people as Untermensch, subhuman, incapable of mastering advanced technology or displaying courage in combat, Hall's victory was more than a kill. It was a direct blow to the very foundation of their racial ideology. But what the Luftwaffe pilots did not yet know, as they prepared to intercept American bombers, was that they were about to face some of the most rigorously trained, highly disciplined, and fiercely motivated fighter pilots in entire United States Army Air Forces. These men carried into combat not only the burden of defending their nation, but also the heavy weight of proving an entire race's worth and capability. Over the next 2 years, their combat record would be written in the skies above Europe. 15,000 combat sorties. 1,578 missions flown. 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. A bomber escort loss rate lower than any white fighter group. Numbers that would eventually force even the most hardened Nazi ideologues and many American skeptics to confront the bankruptcy of their racial theories. Yet, the journey to that first victory did not begin in Sicily, nor even in the skies. It began years earlier, in the hostile environment of segregation in the United States. Long before Charles Hall squeezed the trigger over Sicily, the possibility of black Americans flying combat aircraft seemed almost unthinkable to the U.S. military establishment. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College published a report titled The Employment of Negro Manpower in War. Its conclusions were blunt and damning. Compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. These words, stamped with official authority, declared that black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical duties and the courage for combat leadership. For many in Washington and the War Department, the debate was closed. Black men were simply unfit to fly. Yet, while the military dismissed them, a new generation of black pioneers was already proving the establishment wrong. Eugene Bullard denied the chance to serve his own country, crossed the Atlantic, and flew combat missions for France during World War I. Bessie Coleman, rejected by every American flight school she applied to, traveled to France in 1921, where she earned her pilot's license and became the first black woman to fly. By the 1930s, Chicago's Coffey School of Aeronautics was training dozens of black civilian pilots, demonstrating to anyone who cared to look that flying skill knew no racial boundaries. As war clouds gathered over Europe, pressure for change in America intensified. Civil rights leaders such as Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader A. Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie lobbied tirelessly for black inclusion in military aviation. Black newspapers amplified the call. The Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Baltimore Afro-American hammered the Roosevelt administration with a simple, cutting question. How can America fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? The political reality could not be ignored. In 1940, President Franklin D. Roosevelt was running for an unprecedented third term. He needed black votes in key northern cities. Reluctantly, Washington cracked open the door. On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 was passed. Buried in the legislation was a small amendment requiring the Civil Aeronautics Authority to designate at least one school for the training of black pilots. It was not equality. It was not even integration. It was a concession wrapped in segregation, but was a beginning. 2 years later, on January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. But even this step came with a caveat. The program would be an experiment, a test to see whether black pilots could truly handle combat aviation. At its head stood Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the son of the U.S. Army's first black general. Davis knew the weight of the challenge. As a cadet at West Point, he had endured for years of deliberate silence. No white classmate spoke to him outside of official duties. Now, he carried a heavier burden, not just his own career, but the aspirations of millions of black Americans. The stage was set. The experiment had begun. The men of the 99th Pursuit Squadron were about to step into history. In April 1943, the 99th Fighter Squadron arrived in North Africa. They were attached to the veteran 33rd Fighter Group under the command of Colonel William W. Momeyer, a man who made little effort to hide his skepticism about black pilots. The Tuskegee Airmen were assigned outdated, hand-me-down P-51 Warhawks, tough but already inferior to the German Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s they were expected to face. Momeyer kept them on defensive patrols over the Mediterranean, away from the main battles, waiting for them to stumble. Their first combat test came on June 2, 1943. The mission: escort bombers striking the Italian-held island of Pantelleria. As the formation approached, German fighters appeared out of the blue sky. For the first time, the Tuskegee pilots braced themselves for real combat. They held formation, refusing to break ranks, refusing to give the Luftwaffe an opening. The battle ended with no losses on either side, but the message was clear: these pilots would not fold under fire. Still, doubts persisted. The War Department continued to view the 99th as an experiment on the verge of failure. Critics whispered that black pilots lacked aggressiveness, that they could not match the Germans in a fight. Then came July 2, 1943, the day everything changed. That morning, the 99th was tasked with escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers against Castelvetrano Airfield in Sicily. The bombers had just released their payloads when two Focke-Wulf 190s dove on them from behind. Flying his 8th mission, First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall spotted the German fighters closing in. He later recalled, "I saw two Focke-Wulfs following the bombers just after the bombs were dropped. I turned inside of them and fired a long burst. My tracers cut into the second aircraft. He rolled left and plunged straight into the ground." Hall had done it. He had scored the first aerial victory ever recorded by a black American pilot in U.S. military history. When he landed, the base erupted in celebration. Black ground crews, who had endured months of insults from white personnel, finally had an answer to every slight, every sneer, every doubt. Hall's swastika-marked kill was more than a personal triumph. It was the first crack in the wall of prejudice, proof written in smoke and fire that skill and courage knew no color. But victory did not end the skepticism. By January 1944, Colonel Momeyer filed a scathing report accusing the 99th of lacking aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The recommendation went all the way up to General Henry Hap Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Forces. The future of the Tuskegee experiment hung by a thread. Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, as Allied forces fought to hold their beachhead at Anzio, Italy, the Luftwaffe launched massive raids. 15 Tuskegee pilots, still flying their outclassed P-40s, rose to meet superior German fighters. Over 2 days of furious combat, the 99th shot down between 8 and 13 enemy aircraft. Charles Hall added 2 more victories to his record. In just 48 hours, they destroyed more planes than in the previous 7 months of combat. The War Department commissioned a study comparing their performance to white squadrons. The results were undeniable. The 99th performed just as well as any unit in the theater. The experiment was over. The Tuskegee Airmen had proven themselves. And soon, they would be called to an even greater mission, one that would transform them from an experiment into living legends. By mid-1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron was no longer alone. 3 more all-black squadrons, the 100th, 301st, and 302nd, had been activated. Together, they formed the 332nd Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. In May, the 332nd was reassigned to the 15th Air Force, based in Italy. Their new mission was one of the most dangerous in the war: escort heavy bombers on deep strikes into Nazi Germany. Colonel Davis gathered his men at Ramitelli Airfield and delivered a simple but defining order. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home. Stay with them, no matter what. It was a philosophy that set them apart. Many fighter groups chased personal glory by hunting enemy aircraft. The Tuskegee Airmen chose discipline over ambition. Their mission was not about kills, it was about survival. In June 1944, a new identification system gave each fighter group a distinctive color marking. The 332nd was assigned red. Their P-51 Mustangs with crimson tails, red propeller spinners, and nose bands stood out instantly in the skies over Europe. From that moment on, the bomber crews had a name for them, the Red Tails. At first, the bomber crews didn't know their escorts were black. They only knew these fighters flew tight formations, never abandoned them for easy kills, and defended them with a tenacity unlike any other group. Word spread quickly. If you can, request the Red Tails. Their reputation was tested on July 18, 1944. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to rendezvous with bombers attacking the Luftwaffe base at Memmingen, Germany. The bombers were late, forcing the escorts to orbit dangerously in enemy territory. When the formation finally appeared, so did nearly 100 German fighters, diving in from multiple directions. The battle was savage. In just 20 minutes, the Germans shot down 15 B-17s. The 332nd lost 3 of their own pilots, Lieutenants Robert Hutton, Wellington Irving, and Alfred Brown. Critics seized on the bomber losses as proof that black pilots could not handle a major engagement. But post-mission analysis told a different story. The 332nd had arrived in the middle of an overwhelming attack already in progress. Without their intervention, the bomber losses would have been catastrophic. Despite the bloodshed, their reputation among bomber crews only grew. The Red Tails had stayed. They had not broken away, and that mattered more than anything. By early 1945, the Luftwaffe's conventional fighters were nearly exhausted. But Germany had one final weapon, the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Faster than any Allied plane, armed with cannons that shredded bombers in seconds, the jet represented a new and terrifying challenge. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd received its hardest mission yet, escort bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin to strike the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence warned that Me-262s would be waiting. As predicted, they came. The largest force of German jets assembled during the war rose to meet the bombers. But the Red Tails had prepared. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown had studied the jet's weaknesses. Instead of chasing the faster aircraft, he maneuvered into its blind spot. In a brief window, he fired and scored a kill. 2 more Tuskegee pilots, Earl Lane and Charles Brantley, also downed jets that day. 3 Me-262s destroyed in a single engagement, more than many entire fighter groups managed during the entire war. The mission earned the 332nd a Distinguished Unit citation. The legend of the Red Tails was sealed. Yet not every mission ended in victory. By war's end, 66 pilots had been killed in action, 32 captured as prisoners of war, and 84 lost in training or accidents. Their sacrifices were heavy, but their impact was undeniable. For bomber crews, who lived or died by the discipline of their escorts, the Red Tails became something more than guardians. They became the Red Tail Angels. The Tuskegee Airmen fought their enemies in the skies of Europe, but their war was never just against Germany. It was also against prejudice, abroad and at home. For those who were shot down and captured, the irony was bitter. On August 12, 1944, Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was flying his 19th mission when his P-51 was hit by flak over southern France. He bailed out and was captured. During interrogation, he was stunned by the depth of German intelligence. They knew my unit, our commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit. They even knew my mother's maiden name, Jefferson later recalled. But what shocked him most was how he was treated once transferred to Stalag Luft III, a POW camp. There, he was treated like any other captured American officer. White prisoners from bomber crews often thanked him for the protection the Red Tails had given them. In a Nazi prison camp, Jefferson experienced a level of equality denied to him in his own country. Here I was in a German POW camp being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home, he reflected years later. The contradiction was stark. While German pilots grudgingly respected the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the black Birdmen, many white Americans remained unaware that black pilots even existed. The U.S. War Department rarely publicized their achievements. Mainstream newspapers often minimized or ignored their victories. In contrast, the black press celebrated them. The Pittsburgh Courier ran its WWII campaign, Victory Against Fascism Abroad and Racism at Home, using the Tuskegee Airmen as living proof of black excellence. By war's end, the numbers spoke louder than prejudice ever could. 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000 sorties completed, 179 bomber escort missions, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 destroyed on the ground, 27 bombers lost under their escort compared to the average of 46 for other groups, 96 distinguished flying crosses awarded. These were not statistics of an experiment. They were the record of one of the most disciplined, effective fighter groups in the entire U.S. Army Air Forces. Yet when the Tuskegee Airmen returned home, they stepped off the ships not into honor parades, but back into the segregated reality of Jim Crow America. White units prepared for celebrations. The 332nd faced questions about whether they would even have a place in a peacetime military. The men who had risked their lives to prove equality abroad were once again told they were second-class citizens at home. But history was shifting. In 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, officially desegregating the U.S. military, a decision influenced in no small part by the combat record of the Tuskegee Airmen. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who had led them into battle, rose through the ranks to become the first black general in the U.S. Air Force in 1954. Recognition for the Tuskegee Airmen came slowly, too slowly. For decades, their story remained largely untold outside black communities. Many of the men, like Ace Lee Archer, who recorded for victories, rarely spoke about their service. "Nobody believed me anyway," Archer admitted. "A black fighter pilot must be lying." It wasn't until 2007, more than 60 years after the war, that the surviving airmen received the Congressional Gold Medal from President George W. Bush. Fewer than 300 of the original pilots lived to see it. Still, their legacy had already taken root. They had fought and won 3 wars at once. Against the Luftwaffe in the skies of Europe, against Nazi racial ideology that branded them subhuman, and against American segregation that doubted their courage and skill. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown, who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summarized it best. "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all 3 battles." The Tuskegee Airmen did more than protect bombers. They changed history. They proved that when given the opportunity, courage and excellence soar beyond the boundaries of race. They turned mockery into respect, prejudice into proof, enemies into witnesses. And in doing so, they carved their place forever into the story of freedom. The war in Europe ended in 1945. Nazi Germany collapsed, its racial ideology discredited not only on the battlefield, but in the very skies where black pilots had to fight it with every mission flown. Yet for the Tuskegee Airmen, the victory was incomplete. They returned to an America still bound by segregation. Restaurants, schools, neighborhoods, even the very military they had served remained divided by law and custom. But the contradiction could no longer be ignored. The Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a record of excellence impossible to dismiss. Every bomber escorted home, every German fighter shot down, every decoration awarded was evidence against the lie of racial inferiority. In 1948, only 3 years after the war, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. It was a direct acknowledgement of the Tuskegee Airmen's role in reshaping the military and America itself. Their influence did not end with the military. The discipline, courage, and perseverance they demonstrated inspired a new generation of leaders in the emerging civil rights movement. When Martin Luther King Jr. called for equality, when Rosa Parks refused to surrender her seat, when marchers filled the streets of Montgomery and Washington, they walked in a world already changed by the men who had proven themselves in crimson-tailed Mustangs. Recognition came slowly, but it came. In 1998, the U.S. Capitol unveiled a statue of General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who had endured for years of silence at West Point and gone on to command legends. In 2007, the surviving Tuskegee Airmen stood in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda as President George W. Bush awarded them the Congressional Gold Medal. The president looked out at the aging veterans and declared, "The Tuskegee Airmen helped win a war, and you helped change our nation for the better." By then, many of their comrades had long since passed. But the legacy remained not only in history books or medals, but in every pilot of color who now took to the skies without question of their right to be there. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that true victory is not only measured in enemy planes destroyed or missions completed. It is measured in barriers broken, myths shattered, and futures made possible. Their story is not just about war. It is about transformation of a military, of a nation, and of an idea. When the crimson tails of their P-51 Mustangs gleamed against the blue European sky, they were more than just fighters. They were symbols. Proof that courage, discipline, and excellence belong to no race, no color, only to those willing to rise above doubt and soar.